First, we just need to make some basic adjustments to the unordered list. We'll remove the bullet points, padding, and margins, and then we'll set the font size to something that's slightly smaller than the default. This is a new page, so let's add a new comment to specify that. I'm going to copy my comment here that says Page Portfolio, and then I'm going to scroll down, and let's add it right before the start of our colors here. Instead of Portfolio, I want to be sure to say Contact. And now we can add our styling. I'm going to select the Contact Info class, and let's say List Style None, because remember, this is our list in our HTML. We'll set the padding to 0, margin to 0, and finally, the font size to just 0.9 ems, which again is going to be slightly smaller than the default. So let's switch back to the browser and watch this list to see what that looks like. There we go. Next, I'm going to add background images to each list item. We're going to do this using a new property that's similar to the background property, but in this case, we're adding images instead of adding colors. I'm going to select each list item and add the icons included in the images folder. This will be a slightly different technique than the way we've added images before, because these are mostly for stylistic purposes rather than actual content. We're adding them to our CSS. It might be a good idea to do this for the footer as well, but I wanted to include a variety of image inclusion techniques for the purposes of these lessons. So let's write out that code now. First, we need to select the Contact Info list and then select a list item. And then right next to the list item, I'm going to add the class. I'm not adding a space because this is actually a list item with the class phone on it. So here's the list item, and it has the class phone. If I were to alternatively add a space here, our CSS would expect there to be an element nested inside of the list item with the class phone, which of course there isn't one. There's no element here with the class phone. It's the list item that has the class phone. So we want to remove that space and keep it adjacent. Finally, we want to select the anchor elements inside. So what we're selecting here is this anchor element right here. We're going from contact info to the list item with the class phone and selecting the anchor element. Now, let's type out the property background image, and inside of background image, we're going to use a special value called URL because we need to add a URL. This URL will be the path to our image. Inside of the parentheses we added after the term URL, we need to add 2 single quotes to hold the URL. And then we're going to type 2 dots, a slash, image, and then phone.png. And you'll see that Workspaces is actually suggesting that using its code completion. The 2 dots allow us to go up one directory. So in this case, main.css is inside of the CSS folder. So we can't just jump folders and go straight to the images folder where our phone image is stored. We have to step out of the directory and go up one level. So if we're in main, we type the 2 dots, that will bring us up to the root folder here. And then we can go back down into image and finally phone. So we're going up a directory, out of the CSS directory, Then we're going back down a directory into images. And then we're grabbing the phone.png image. Let's copy and paste this because we need to use very similar code with just some slight modifications. We'll paste this 2 times. All we need to do here is change the classes to mail and Twitter. And then we need to change the names of our images to mail and Twitter. So we'll save that out. And if we refresh our page, you can see that something strange is going on here, and they actually don't look right at all. They're supposed to be left of the text here, but it looks like the images we have are somewhat jumbled and just on top of the text. We need to add some spacing and positioning here. So let's jump back to our code. We'll scroll up, and let's say contact info and select the anchor elements, because this is something that needs to apply to all 3 of those anchor elements. We'll set the display to block, the minimum height to 20 pixels, the background repeat property to no repeat, the background size property to 20 pixels and 20 pixels, and then the padding to 0, 0, 0, 30 px. That's a lot of code. Let's figure out what we just did here. We've set the display to block. This means that each one of our images, or our anchor elements in this case, will take up space. That will give us a little bit more space to work with so that our images have a place to actually be displayed. Next, we've set the minimum height for each item to 20 pixels. This is the minimum height at which our icons will be fully visible, because each one is about 20 pixels tall. So we don't want these to get any shorter than that. We need to have at least a minimum height of 20 pixels. Next, we've set 2 additional background properties, background repeat and background size. Background images in CSS will always repeat by default, but we want these backgrounds to only display once. So we've set the background to no repeat. Next, the background size property will resize the backgrounds. Once again, similar to our footer images, these images are slightly larger than they need to be. In fact, they're double the size that they need to be. But sizing them down will make them look sharp on high-resolution displays and give us the extra visual fidelity that we need. Finally, we've set the padding. For the padding, we want lots of extra space on the interior of the element's left side, because that's where our images are going to go, on the left side of these links. So it will push the text over to the right because there's padding on the left, and that will give the images a place to be displayed. Now, there is one more thing we need to add here. I'm going to set the margin to 0, 0, and 10 pixels, and that will add 10 pixels of margin on the bottom, just to give each one of our links some separation from one another vertically. Now, this is actually a good opportunity to see the difference between margin and padding. So I'm actually going to comment out the padding for a moment. To do that, I'm just going to hit Command and then /, and that will add a comment around the padding so it won't be interpreted by the browser. Let's save this out, switch back, and now that we've added all of this code, let's refresh and see what it looks like. As you can see, the text is still right on top of our icons here. So let's uncomment this. Again, I'm just going to hit Command/ or Control/ if you're on Windows to uncomment it. I'll switch back and refresh. And as you can see, our text moved over to the right because some padding was added to the left side of the text, 30 pixels of it. This leaves some space for the images to be displayed. Now, let's see what happens if we were to remove the margin. I'll save that, switch back and refresh. And as you can see, there's not too much space between each one of our links because it's removed the 10 pixels of padding on the bottom, but we want that back, so let's uncomment that again, save it out, and refresh, and now there's more room between each one of our links. So that's about it for our contact page. We're ready to move on. Great work! We're more than halfway finished with our site. Coming up next, we'll learn how to make our site work across a variety of screen resolutions like desktops and tablets. Then we'll launch it live to the web. Finally, we'll learn how to fix some common errors and bugs that you might come across along the way.